In this episode, I sat down with Obinna Udenwe. Obinna is a Nigerian writer and civil engineer. The conversation spanned over 2 hours, and we had the pleasure of talking about different themes from political unrest in Nigeria to the political situations in the north and different conspiracy theories that have been generated over the years as to who is sponsoring terrorism in Nigeria and by extension Africa. We looked at Sudan, a place that gave rise to him writing the things he got to write at the time he did them. He's the author of Satans and Shaitans, and he is equally the author of Colors of Hatred. His book, Colors of Hatred, won the Chinua Achebe Prize for Literature, and he was also a finalist for the Nigerian Literary Prize for Fiction. And ever since he came to the limelight, he has juxtaposed Nigeria's existential realities in his novel, Satans and Shaitan. The first time I picked the book up to read, left a lasting memory for me, and I want you also to go look out that particular book and then find a way to come to read that. Not just that, you should look at The Woman Who Died with Flowers in Her Mouth and a whole lot of other conversations we've had. In this particular episode, we'll be unpacking political terms, we'll be unpacking cultural beliefs and the different metaphysical norms and realities that govern certain parts of the country. We'll be looking at insecurity, we'll be looking at the need for publishing, we'll be looking at the need for different publishers, we'll be looking at the need to grow a publishing base, be it from journals and magazines and conversations that follow this particular line of thought and line of action. You don't want to miss out on this particular conversation. If you're a lover of Nigeria's literature, if you're a lover of African literature, if you're a lover of literature in the world, I would want you to look at all these conversations and let's see how things would go and let's see how the conversations forward would be. At the end of this conversation, you will come to see the need to be politically active, to be politically engaged with the society and the world where you find yourself as a Nigerian now into the future. What do I have to say again? This is Boring Conversations. My guest today is Obinna Udenwe, Nigerian author, writer, and civil engineer. He's the author of the acclaimed novels Satans and Shaitans, a gripping political thriller, a first of its kind in the history of Nigeria's literary scene. He's also the author of Colors of Hatred, which won the prestigious Chinua Achebe Prize for Literature, and he was also a finalist for the Nigerian Prize for Literature, which was won by the son of the house. He is also the author of the short story collection, The Widow Who Died with Flowers in Her Mouth. And I would also want to ask, in the course of this conversation, who killed the widow? And I know he might not want to give us an answer to that particular story, but it just happened after so many years of she refusing to, fall into the hands of the friends to her late husband. She announced her lover, and then she died with flower in her mouth. And then you'll get to also see a couple of other stuff like someone stealing the village masquerade. In Igbo cosmology, you get to hear things as one who steals the village drum will not have any other place to get to play it, but stealing a masquerade is something very strange.
It used to happen here in many years ago. That was Europeans. There was like a thirst for masquerades from Africa, perhaps for their museums or private collections and so on. So you had a lot of people in the Igbo area, and I am sure in other African countries, selling their masquerades, drums, and and then having them sold to the white people or the Europeans. And there are very funny stories of people who did that in my area, and cosmological implications of what they did. There are many people now who nobodies who are, maybe to use the word idiots, for suffering from the effect of stealing those masquerades, because there are spiritual attachments to those masquerades. But many people didn't know that, so they just go arm yourself, take the masquerade, sell to the Europeans, and then a year, 2 years after, you begin to see the effect of it. I know of a man who, when I was growing up, was one of the most promising young men we had in my area as at the time. He stole our village masquerade, sold it, and then ran away. And for 20 to 30 years, he was roaming about the entire country. He told us when he returned, finally a few years back, that he got himself in several accidents. In Lagos, he would move from Lagos to Port Harcourt, the same thing would happen. Port Harcourt to Ibadan, the same thing would happen. He kept on getting misfortunes upon misfortunes upon misfortunes. So you find that in that story, okay, the character's father stole the village masquerades, and you find the effect of that followed the father, and then followed him. So that story is the redemption of Father Margetti. You find that the story is actually how an attempt to try to for Father Margetti to redeem himself.
What a beginner down there for an author who normally allows his writers to hang on there and gets to keep them close to that cliff. We've already gotten a glimpse into what our conversation down here would look like. He's also the author of the provocative Holy Sex, and you wonder what holy sex would mean if you've not encountered his works. And right about this time, pre-orders are still going on, I want to believe, for years of shame, which promises to continue his bold and unflinching exploration of Nigerian society, politics, and collective memory to a large extent. In addition to his fiction, as I said earlier, he is a civil engineer, a thing many persons don't believe up until tomorrow. He's also a co-founder and editor at the Village Square Journal, a platform for literary and political criticism dedicated to promoting diverse voices from around the continent and also around the world. He has contributed to numerous esteemed journals and magazines, and outside this particular sphere, you can call him a farmer, you can call him a public commentator. All this he has done graciously. He plays an active role in Nigeria's intellectual and cultural life while offering deep insights into power struggle, and you get to see this in his works. Today we will talk about his journey as a writer, the stories behind his books, and the role of literature in addressing the deep and often uncomfortable questions at the heart of our human and national experiences. All of his works, you get to find these themes reoccurring down there. He is also closely involved in the political situations, not just in his state, as well as in the country and in the global situation we find ourselves at the moment. Welcome, my brother.
Thank you so much for having me, my friend.
The idea of hatred starts first from the family, moves to the society, and then hits the global village we find ourselves. You treated this theme so well in what now you can call the different colors of hatred. What gave rise to that particular work? Are we still hating ourselves? Has it increased? Is it decreasing, or we are just stagnant at the moment with hatred?
Okay, thank you so much for the question. First off, I've always been intrigued by the idea of hate. Why do I need to hate my friend or my neighbor or someone I don't even know? In fact, that is even the most hilarious of it all. You don't know this person, perhaps because they're not from your culture, they're not from your tribe or your country, and that alone is enough to hate them. So I played around the idea. So some time ago, when I got admission to study civil engineering and I moved to Enugu, I was living alone in a flat and I wanted to write a novel. So the first idea that came to my mind was to write, and that week, while thinking about what to write, the Sudanese, the war in Darfur was raging. So I said, okay, why not write about this hate, the hate that we find that they can process into a war, okay, and then sit with part of this story in this war, and then part of the rest of it in the Nigerian political scene, and try to marry the two. So how do we how does political how does the action of a person, say a politician, affect um, individuals around them, and how do we navigate that? So these were ideas playing in my mind when I decided to write about color of hatred.
It took you over a decade to get to finish,
Yes,
and we are hearing about this particular situation down here. Pope Francis is dead. He went to Sudan at a point in his life, knelt down, kissed the feet of these leaders.
yes.
They claim to have this sense of piety in them and all that, and one would have expected that the war would have ended by then. But no, Khartoum was captured the other day, and the war is still going on. How does that make you feel as a human, and then also as a writer, knowing fully well that this took you more than 10 years to look at, and it was the beginning of your inspiration to work on this? I know you talked about what happens in Turkey and a couple of other places where they give these injunctions about hatred, about um, hate and all that. Sami lost his eye because of also the him writing the satanic verse and all that, and you find many persons go through this. How does that make you feel that up until now, a place that gave you inspiration to write this book, almost 15 years down the line, are still having the same conflict they're having?
As at the time I started writing Colors of Hatred, Sudan was still one country. Okay,
Yeah,
but then there was that hate between the two, South Sudan and then Northern Sudan. And
sure.
when you read Colors of Hatred, you find that historical narrative of um, of the country, how they were colonized by Britain, how Britain favored northern uh, Arab Muslims in Sudan, and the way southern Christians were treated. Okay, and they were amalgamated into one country, just like what happened in Nigeria in 1914 when Lugard brought the north and the southern Nigeria into one country. And then the hate continued. There was no strong attempt to address this. And then there was the first rebellion in Sudan many years back, and it happened again. And then, of course, ended by coup after coup. Okay, and then series of very bad political leaders and bad political decisions. And you find that work which started, which I centered Colors of Hatred on, and it was my hope writing that it was going to come to an end, and it did come to an end. Okay, and there was the breakaway of South Sudan as an independent nation, and I was
Yeah,
very glad because I thought, okay, now this is a very small country, the smallest independent country as at that time, or the youngest independent country as at that time in Africa, and they were going to try to um, learn from all of the experiences of fighting a war with their brothers of in the northern Sudanese for many decades. So that I was very hopeful that this country was going to turn out very well. But then just a few, I think it didn't take long, and then the same thing started happening in southern Sudan. Okay, the war, and it was as if Sudan was laughing at southern Sudan. Okay, you see, you were because of the conflict all this while. You're going your independence and you're fighting yourselves. And then to our greatest surprise, just last year, or last 2 years, was it last 2 years, Sudan also got themselves into a civil war. So it's I also have a master's in peace studies and conflict resolution, And you see, conflict is a terrible thing. It starts very small, just with it's like what Asa sang in her song, okay? Um, a jailer, where she
Yeah,
sang
you're
about
in prison. I'm in prison too.
yes. Okay, so you find the politician or the leader who sends people to go to war, okay, and the people they send to go to war do not even question why they have to take up arms to fight. Okay, so conflict starts very small, something very minuscule can trigger it off, and before you know it, it grows into a hydra-headed thing that tries to consume everyone. So I feel saddened that over these years, South Sudan that broke away from Sudan is not in peace. Sudan itself is not at peace with themselves. There is war now, and it's inexplicable. What are they fighting for? Okay, so it's a shame. And you mentioned Pope Francis, late Pope Francis, God rest his soul, who kissed the feet of these leaders and tried to endear them to himself and preach to them, to tell them to let go of bloodshed. But you still find that there is no peace in these places. So, but beyond the wider conflict in Sudan, what cause of hatred tries to bring to the fore is what hate can do. Okay, you find that Leona's grandfather, who was one of the leaders of the Sudanese People Liberation Army in the first section of this book, okay,
Yeah.
was hated by his people for trying to make peace. And then they killed him in very gruesome manner, which led to Leona and her parents relocating to Nigeria, where her father is from. And then in Nigeria, her father gets involved in politics, begins to hate on everybody around him, and destroys his family, his wife, his lovely wife in the process, his daughter in the process, and tries to channel that hate in his daughter and nurture it in such a way that he wants his daughter to go and hating other people. And you see how that destroys the family. So for me, what I want people to learn in while reading Colors of Hatred is to understand that a little hate can grow to become something that we find difficult to control. And at the end, it consumes us all.
It reminds me of Umberto Eco when he was talking about, he was asked a question after he must have written Eternal Fascism. He got asked a question about hate and love, and he said love is a very, very unpopular thing. It doesn't, the politicians don't want it to be spread. It's something that should be restricted to a few persons. And he was reflecting on how the fascist regime of last century expanded their expansionist idea, not with the idea of love. So he was even critiquing the idea of soldiers who go to war. They don't really go to war because they love their country or they love this stuff they are doing, just like you pointed out. They don't question. They just hit the battle because they have been told to hit the other group of persons down there. They have been told to hit their own neighbor. And if you bring this back to ourselves, you look at our own country, this has been the way in which we've looked at politics for a very, very long time. You know, we've been told the House has betrayed the Igbos. We've been told the Yorubas betrayed the Igbos. We've been told the Hausas and the Igbos did this or this particular group did that. And in the grand scale, in the grand scheme of things, it looks as though it's left for we, the poor people, to get to look at. Lugard did the amalgamation. We at the moment are Nigerians. What ways should we be looking at bringing about peace from your expertise now as a, will I say, peace diplomat or so? What angle should we be looking at to bring about lasting peace in the country? I know education should be one of them, but beyond education, what other conversation should we be having amongst ourselves? Because I want to believe you've had experience with other Nigerians. I have also had experience with other Nigerians. If I'm on a train, even if I meet somebody from Tanzania, I'm like, this is my sister, this is my brother. When we are outside, but when it comes to when it comes back to the the country itself, If I should also look at something like someone like Ojukwu, when he wrote Because I'm Involved, he talked about the idea of the tribe giving up some space for the nation to really take its full shape. Because sometimes people run back to the tribe when they feel annihilated from the state. Recently, I don't know if you've seen the tweet by Cubana chief priest and the whole idea of E-money being arrested and now trying to twist in the Igbo narrative to
Yes,
bring
to
out
appear
some,
as if Igbos have been dehumanized or targeted wrongly, which
yeah,
is wrong. And you see, these wealthy, famous men try to play to the gallery when a situation doesn't suit them. And that is the problem of Nigeria. Say, for instance, Obinna Udenwe wants to become a minister and he lobbies to get a ministerial slot and doesn't get it. He will shout, "Oh, it's because I'm Igbo." Or let's say I don't win the Nigerian Prize for Literature. Instead of going back to prepare to write a better work and enter the next round, or to look at, okay, maybe because I am not really a very good writer, I should try to improve my craft. I would say, oh, I didn't win because the judge doesn't like me. They don't like me because I am Igbo. So, and it is this tribal sentiment that is inherently um, in our being as a people, nurtured over the years. I don't know how that came to be, but you find that every young person in Nigeria, even a child of today, gets to be made to understand that they are first of all Yoruba or Igbo, Hausa or Efik or Tiv than before they are made to understand that they are Nigerians. So this nurturing, this grooming of our people to understand, to be tribalistic, okay, is the bane of our society. And to answer your question now, I think that it all rests on the shoulders of leadership. Chinua Achebe wrote that the problem with Nigeria is that of
it's
leadership,
leadership. Yeah,
because we need to have a leader. We have President Tinubu currently, and you find that the other day they were extracting his appointees, his cabinet, not just his cabinet, but those he has appointed over times for the last 2 years, and you find most of them are Yoruba. It's a shame. So,
sure.
what lesson are you trying to pass across? Buhari did it and we condemned it. Most
Yeah,
of the people he appointed into power were Yorubas. In fact, he openly said he wasn't going to, no one should expect him to do much in Igbo area or in the Southeast because they didn't give him votes. Okay? And you begin to ask yourself whether he was in his right senses when he said that. Okay, because you are supposed to provide leadership for your countrymen, whether they vote for you or not. You're supposed to make sure they have quality education, security, infrastructure, and so on and so forth, because they are your people. Even if you win with just one vote, okay, you're
even
not
if you
going to
don't win any vote from there,
from there, yes. But even if what you won for your election in as a whole is just one vote, okay, you're not going to look at, okay, and you're going to begin to pinpoint those who did not vote for you and say, okay, they shouldn't get social amenities because they didn't vote for me. I think that is unintelligent. That is um, a very terrible mindset to have as a leader. So, and one would expect that the present administration would have corrected it to say, okay, we're not going to continue with this mistake. It was a mistake, a terrible one at that. Okay, we're going to be the better person here. The person's here to do the right thing, to make sure that there is a national spread. Okay, that people get what is rightfully theirs. But you see, this has continued. Now, what do you expect another person? Let's say an Igbo man becomes president tomorrow. Igbos would rally around him and say, you see, we are going to get all of the better positions, juicy positions, because the Northern man did it, the Yoruba man did it, we should as well do it. And if that is done and it's allowed to continue, the country will degenerate into chaos and anarchy, and this sentiment will continue to grow. So I think that for us to eliminate hate, we need to have good leaders. It first should start with leadership. And it's not just at the national level, even at the state level, you find that if a governor is from a particular senatorial zone, those who are from that senatorial zone rallies around him and try as much as possible to get him to understand that, oh, you are first off a governor before being the governor of the state. So with the local government chairman, the people from his village tell him, look, you're first our chairman of our village. Everything should come here first before it goes to other places. And that's why you find people find it difficult to hold leaders accountable so long as that leader is from their place. So if Obinna Udenwe is a president and he is corrupt, every Igbo person says, oh, he's incorrupt because he's Igbo. But turn the table, and a Yoruba man is president. Oh, a Igbo person says, oh, he is corrupt. And Yoruba people would say, oh, he's not corrupt because he is from their place. So it's a terrible thing that would need quality leadership, conscious leadership to change.
It's so disheartening that it has gotten to this level, and sometimes people just look at the national level alone without looking at the state, without looking at the local governments, without looking at the arms that form what we now call the Republic of Nigeria. If I should say that, it's like it's just the president and the president alone to do in and about everything. I know in looking at the seminar work by Chinua Achebe, where he exclaimed that it was like an exclamation raised to power three. So the failure of its leadership, and in and about that, leadership also in our personal life, like you've rightly pointed out, how to go about things, how not to go about things, how to look at things, and how not to look at conversations in our country. We've looked at hate. What about political betrayal? What about the revenge that comes from the colors of hatred still, and the trauma that lingers a bit longer? How do we look at that? Because if you look at from the works of Chinua Achebe as far back as 62, when he was looking at the man of the people and all that, you see the tussle between Nanga and Edna and all those conversations down there. It's still playing out completely in your novel down here 50, 60 years down the line. Political betrayal and the whole idea of our own sense of politics at the moment. Few days ago, I had Professor Nimi Wariboko on the podcast, and we were talking about magic, and not magic in the spiritual sense, just magic as how people just want magic to happen, and how that has affected the ways in which preachers preach. That it has also affected the magic we want to see in a leader. People just want, okay, P2B or Atiku or this Messiah we envisage in our head to just come with goodies, and then all of a sudden the country becomes something entirely different. If we could start from political betrayal, Okoa just recently released some statements, and the conversations continue down there. The defection has happened. He's in the happy side now at the moment. Who knows what will happen tomorrow? How do we treat political betrayal? Political betrayal, first by party members, and second by the ideologies and promises our leaders get to offer us before they go to power. How do we hold them accountable?
It's by becoming more political conscious. We have a laid-back citizenship situation in Nigeria. The citizens are sort of very comfortable. Okay, I think we have been pushed to the wall, beaten so much that it's like a woman who receives domestic violence and then has been so beaten by the husband that she's more or less helpless. Okay, so if she's offered just a cup of tea, if, to her it's heaven. Okay, oh, today I get a tea, so wow, maybe he's changing. So the citizens are so laid back in Nigeria that we let everything by politicians go. Okay, we no longer question what they do. In fact, Nigerians questioned what the military dictators did. They were on the street protesting. There were groups petitioning against them, fighting them, intellectuals, university students. Okay, if you read Babangida's IBB Babangida's memoir,
Yeah.
okay, you find that one of his greatest challenges as a president or as a military head of state was students
Unionism.
unionism, continuously fighting him, questioning his regime. Okay, but today you find that immediately someone becomes a president, he ensures that he changes the head of the Nigerian students' body to someone from his tribe. Okay, and the person tries to ensure that the student body is dead. In fact, the student body today is made up of or is led by people who are in their 40s, and you wonder, are they really students? Are they even students? So that um there is lack of political consciousness in Nigeria, okay, currently. So you find that people are laid back. They're not really much interested in governance. Okay, whatever they receive, whatever. So if a governor builds a road, everybody claps. So, Rocha Sokrocha was making status in Owerri, in Imo State. He was busy building statues in everywhere, and people were clapping for him. Okay, I went to Owerri. I saw the things he was doing back then. People were clapping. Okay, and one day I complained, and my dad's friend, a very prominent man, he said, "Look, in Nigeria, a governor is God. So whatever he does, you clap for him because he can choose to do nothing and nothing will happen." And I thought about it. Okay, so and it's such a shame, a very big shame. So we need to be conscious of our environment. We need to get actively involved in politics. We can run for election. Even if we can't run for election, let us participate. Let us get involved during election, during campaign. I like what happened during the 2023 election with the P2P Obi movement thing and how young people rallied around him. Okay, it's a clarion call. And even though he didn't win, I think this has opened way for P2B to try again, or for other people like him who are visionary, who have the interest of Nigeria at heart, the core interest of Nigeria at heart, to try to come out, to run for elections, to try to bring up about change. Okay, so about betrayal, yeah, it's in politics. Okay, I do not think that politicians behave the way they do because they are afraid of betrayal. No, I think that politicians do that because of greed and corruption. Okay, every Nigerian politician wants to be richer than the next person because they know that it's only by embezzlement, by acquiring wealth that they don't that the next generation can't even finish, that they continue to remain in power. Because in Nigeria you use money to buy, and any person who stands in their way of achieving that, they see that as a
Betrayal.
betrayal. Yeah, and you find that is why they continue to defect from one political party to another. So if the ruling party uses EFCC against them, they defect to seek protection because they don't want this power to elude them. They don't want to lose their wealth, and if they lose this wealth, they lose power. So that is it. And anyone who stands on their way, they term that person as a betrayer. Does it bring hate? Yes, but that's not at the core of our problem. It is what is at the core of our problem is the hate within the citizens. Okay, it could be because of corruption, because the environment is rotten already, and that also explains leadership. But this hate you find in banditry, you find in terrorism, you find in kidnapping. Okay, do we kidnap the political leaders? No. Do we kidnap the religious leaders, those who are at the top echelon of politics and religion and commerce in Nigeria? No. We kidnap market women, farmers who kill farmers in Jos, in Enugu, Ahamufu. Almost every week, people die at Ahamufu in Enugu State.
It
Okay,
reminds
and
me of it reminds me of the kidnap of the owner of Octavia Pharmacy in Abakaliki.
oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So okay, so and that's a very young man who has this chain of pharmacies, and that's the only place you can go to at any time and get any medicine you want, even at odd hours, and then he gets kidnapped. And so we kidnap ordinary citizens because of this unchecked hate in us. Okay, and the politicians who have caused these problems go in their convoys, nothing happened to them, you cannot even reach them. So we are our problem. So I don't think political betrayal is a problem to in Nigeria or is a cause of our problem in Nigeria. I think that it is leadership and hate among citizens.
Wow. You've unpacked a whole lot down there, and it was leading me to Satans and Shaitans. I was about asking what led you to use fiction to unpack, the quiet connections between political elites and extremist religious groups in the country. But if we should push a bit further, it's not conspiracy theory, but it looks like one. Who do you think sponsors the different terrorist groups we have at the moment in the country, whether it's from the north or from the continuous denial of what happens in the east? Because I think in the east, generally, we've had this idea of denying the reality that our own brothers can also harm us, as well as we ordinarily can also accuse the headers who come up from the other side. So you still see this sense of denial. We in the East denying that our brothers and sisters cannot do any of these kidnappings and killings. And the idea of the unknown gunman is something entirely born out of foreigners coming into the country. How do you respond to that?
Okay, so if we are a country that reads, we would have Satans and Shaitans would have been a bestseller. It would have been a
Sure.
book that would find difficult to find in any bookshop because of how fast it would have been selling. Okay, because it's one of the first books that drew attention to the fact that this terrorism ongoing in the north might not even be sponsored by the northerners. In fact, in Satans and Shaitans, you find what that book has done is to place the sponsors of terrorism in the north on the shoulders of some political elites in the southern part of the
Yeah.
country.
Yeah.
Okay, events of the past few years and months have shown that this terrorism in the north are sponsored by foreigners and some political elites in Nigeria. It's now very, very clear. Okay, so you've read about you said conspiracy and how they fund terrorism in some countries, including in Nigeria. Okay, aided by some political big shots in Nigeria, and so on and so forth. So as much as that is denied, there is no. If you investigate it deeply, you find some some networks of truth connected to it. Okay, so that's one very good thing that fiction does. So sometimes you find, and then it happened with Chinua Achebe after he wrote The Man of the People, and shortly
Yeah.
after, too, and they thought, oh, he must have had
He had
information.
info, and then they came after him in Lagos, and he had to smuggle his wife through the canal to Port Harcourt, and then he went by road himself.
Yes. So that's one good thing about fiction. In fact, fiction reflects reality. Sometimes what the author is like a prophet, prophesying, foretelling what is about to happen or what might happen in the next 100 years, without even knowing it himself that he has done something as fascinating as that. Banditry and kidnapping and the killings in Nigeria, okay, you find that those were already estrayed in Satans of Satans. And towards the end of that book, you find the author saying that some sleeper cells has been created. Some sleeper cells have been created, and they are waiting for when another will be received for them to be activated and then attack various segments of the country. And
Yeah.
it's prophecy that is already happening now. We are seeing now in Nigeria. So I wouldn't be surprised if the DSS or the NIA read citizens of Shaitans and invite me for questioning. Okay, so what is happening in Nigeria is very it's saddening to say the least. And again, we have to rest it on the shoulders of leadership. In Rivers State, there is a political tension between a godfather and a godson, a sitting governor, and then you declare
Hmm.
sort of and unconstitutionally remove a sitting governor. And unjust people are killed, buried in mass graves, communities are attacked, and you don't declare a state of emergency, and you expect us to respect you as a leader, as a president. We expect Nigerians to be patriotic. So it's a shame. It's a shame.
It's just like the relationship between Adeline and Donaldo. You know, the whole idea of brutality around them. The relationship between Nigeria and her leaders is just like that uncle that gets to, you know, probably do some crazy things around you and probably want to abuse you, and at the same time want to shield this particular information from the brother family, probably just between you and him. But in the case of Nigeria here, it's completely seen in the open. It's completely noticed by everybody, and everybody gets to see what's happening. This spirit of this spirit of
And
giving up.
yet,
Okay.
yet it continues brazenly. I
Yeah,
agree
it
with you. Yet it
continues.
continues brazenly. Yeah.
My father experienced this. Your father experienced this. We are here at the moment now. We are still experiencing the same stuff, and you find many persons. You go to different comment sessions when David Hundeyin writes, when different persons put out stuff down there. You just find this idea of completely giving up. This complete idea of shutting the selves. If we just have food to eat for ourselves, whatever happens out there doesn't really concern us, and we just want to move to the next day. For how long can we continue with this particular spirit while the country burns, while our Neros get to dance to the gallery, while our own room gets to burn down? And
I am afraid it's going to continue for a very long time without anything changing, without Nigerians doing anything. There was an attempt in 2020 during the NSAS protests
yeah,
to right the situation, and the political elite clamped down on the youth, and everything turned into a bloodshed. And the most terrible, it reminds me of Han Kang's Human Acts, which is centered on the permit me to use the word intifada, or
yeah,
revolts that happened in South Korea
sure.
years back. Okay, that's like a replica what happened in October 2020 in Nigeria. Okay, and it it's saddening that it might take very long time for something like that to be another attempt of something like that, because of that clampdown in very gruesome manner. Young people lost their lives. Many people are still unaccounted for today. And then last year there was another attempt to do a bad governance protest, and you see, uh, we also how that turned out. There was another clampdown. In fact, it was people were even nonchalant to participate because of the experience of 2020. And
Hmm.
the most shocking part of it is that it is young people who are used to clamp down on these things. In 2020, when we were participating in the NSAS protests here in Abuja, people who parked their cars to join the protest came back to saw hundreds of cars in flames. Who were those sent to burn them? Young people were sent to set them ablaze. Okay, so you find that in Nigeria, if young people decide to go on protest, you see another set of young people who are paid $1,000 to go on counter, not just to go on counter protest, but to attack and injure them, or attempt to injure them for pretenses. Just a few months back, NNPC sponsored a protest against was this Channels or Arise Television?
Arise TV.
Yes, Arise TV. And at the premises of Arise TV, they were seen fighting over some money they were paid to go on this protest. So my fear is that this is going to continue for a very, very long time. And it's will education solve the problem? I don't think so. Because you find that we have very poor education in Nigeria. Our fathers had better education. That's why they
Sure.
could write articles on newspapers against the military dictatorships of that time, military regimes of that time. They could organize cells to try to sabotage government activities and so on and so forth in a bid for us to get democracy. Now we're in a democracy, and it seems to have gotten worse. So I don't think there is hope. I don't think there is hope. I am someone who is usually optimistic, but for Nigeria, is Nigeria going to get better? I don't think so. At least in our generation now.
Yeah,
It's something to reflect on, but I don't think
yeah,
so. And I'll give you an example. In my state, we have a very young governor. Okay, he just turned 50 in 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 January, and when he became governor, I think at 48.
yeah.
Right. So what he has done is to bring in some young people to his cabinet in their 20s, 30s, and these young people every day continue
Run
to
terrible stuff.
disappoint disappoint him. Okay, you find they don't understand what policy decisions are. They don't even know how to craft policies. They don't understand how to run government. They see government as an avenue to enrich themselves. Oh, their fathers enriched themselves, so it's their turn to do that. So how and now so imagine these young people in their 20s and 30s becoming senators and well, then one of somebody from my state, Senator Achebe, he's my senator. You see the
Yeah,
shame.
I was like,
Yes, the shame we have brought us at the national level. Okay, so and you say Nigeria is going to get better when this set of leaders now who are very, very corrupt and they're leading us, but then had quality education, hands over to my generation who received poor education and are more corrupt. So do you think Nigeria is going to get better with my set of or my generation, when my generation takes over? I don't think so. I think things are going to get worse. So our hope lies in us finding a leader now among that generation of our fathers who had quality education, who would come in and change the mindset of Nigerians of my generation and sieve us and find the best of us, the well educated, the intelligent ones amongst us, the smart ones amongst us, and groom them to take over leadership. But we find that increasingly the political elites do not want intelligent, educated, well educated, smart people to get into politics because they are afraid of them. They think they might not respect them. They think they might uh, veer off from the course we are on now, okay, to try to make the country better, okay, and might not be loyal to them. So what they do, they find fools, okay, and there is this person, I can't remember his name now, who said, if you want to be regarded as a great leader, make sure your successor is a fool. Because if you're succeeded by a fool, okay, people will look back and say, oh, how
this
we
man
wish
was a good man.
yeah, how we wish the other person was still in power. He was a good man. But when that person was in power, he was a terrible person. But you now have a fool who has succeeded him, and people want him to come back. The challenge is that the political elite currently wouldn't even want to hand over to young people who are smart and intelligent and well educated and well uh, read and learned. The touts, the louds, okay, the they are those who are subservient to them, who are their beck and call to take off from them so that the corruption will continue. It's sad, but I don't think there is hope.
It's so real that sometimes you want to deny the reality of this. And if we're still going to go back to Chinua Achebe's, not there was a country, Chinua Achebe's, the trouble with Nigeria, you get to see him talk about that particular line leaves me with chills. It's like at the end of the introduction of why he was writing the book he was writing, he talked about, does it ever worry us that history, which neither personal wealth nor power can preempt, will pass terrible judgment on us? Why pronouncing anathema on our names when we have accomplished our betrayals and passed on? And he said, we have lost the 20th century. Are we bent on seeing that our children also, lose the 21st century? And he ended by saying, God forbid. But from the 80s, when he wrote this particular work, down to our times, things have become so bad. Things have become so bad, and people don't even look at the sense of education. And why I get so afraid, people don't really understand my sense of fear, and I share also in your fear that while we're talking about the North and what is happening up North, the whole idea of the Amajiri system, the nomadic system down there, down in the South, down in the West. I've lived in the West. I've lived for a short period of time in the East. I lived about 14 years of my life in what is called the South South, as in Cross River. And I've also spent time in Abuja too. I lived in Uso Zone 5. You see, if we were to start by talking about the East, there's this sense of making money and making it fast. The other time I discussed with Ugochukwu and Adi about the whole idea of Okite, the whole idea of Ikembute and all those stuffs we now get to see. Even in the whole idea of going back to our roots, many persons get to opine. In a place like Delta, I learned that mothers take their children to go hand over to informal schools, a kind of a different way of Nwa boy, but now not for the right reason, but now for them to learn their trade and then go about doing their stuff. You see this also in Yahoo Yahoo, written by Ken Oke, and you see this also in the works of Professor Wale Adewani, and how he talks about the whole attack on. I don't even want to go and talk about Nuhu Ribadu now, and and how all those he criticized and all those he came to attack during his early days in the EFCC are now in and about those he is working with one way or the other, and one begins to ask, from where to where to here in Nigeria? Because if all the persons that were on his watch list, one is the president, one is the Senate president, a couple of other persons are spread into different arms, and maybe he's just been defeated by the same thing himself talked about. When he was given a TED talk in Berlin, he said, when you fight corruption, corruption fights back. And many persons ordinarily find themselves within different political circle. The gap between those educated and those not educated, those not so educated, and those who have given up hope, the margin is so, it's not just wild. The margin is so broad that it will take the next 40, 50 years to merge that gap, to allow people either to die naturally, because with people so uneducated in terms of making simple syllogisms and simple arguments, you find them in their 20s, in their 30s, in their 40s, 50s, 60s. Let's not even go to the 60s, 50s, and they have about 40, 50 years to live more. So these are the crop of persons who will be dealing with in the next 30, 40 years as Nigerians, either in the diaspora or those within the hem of affairs of the country, within the same country. Sheyi Tinubu is being campaigned for to contest for the governor of Lagos in 2027, and you find people in the diaspora holding meetings and bringing in and about what should be looked out there. But against all odds, if the country has to change, you've talked about a leader that will come and give us this sense of change, but it's not somebody from our generation, of course. You've pointed it out. It's somebody that will be from the generation before us. What are the characteristics this person should embody? Should it be somebody we've known? Is it someone that has been in the affairs of government and governance, or is just somebody probably who's just lived his quiet life and now wants to come to do things? And how would the political class get to accept such situation?
It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be a Herculean task. I don't know who this person is, but there are still very good Nigerians, educated, smart, living in Nigeria or outside Nigeria, and it would take personal decision. This person must have to rise up and say, look, like what Peter B is doing now. He's a great man. He's a visionary. Okay, but there is not just one Peter B. There are many others. So,
Sure.
like him, need to wake up and either on the own attempt to do what he's doing, or meet up with him and team up with him and try to do it. Not what El-Rufai is trying to do. El-Rufai, I think, is a terrible human. Okay, he only has his interests at heart and tries to align and realign when it suits him. Okay, and for his own personal gains. All
The
right. So,
accidental civil servant.
yes, to answer your question, I think there are Nigerians, both in the diaspora and in Nigeria, who are good, inherently good, and who can transform the country. And they need to start now. Are there people in my generation like that? Yes. But are we prepared now? I don't think we are. Only, I don't think. I think with what I'm seeing and with what I've seen. Okay, you mentioned about what is going on in the southeast, the OK 13, where every young person wants to drive a G wagon, live in a mansion and Lekki, build houses here and there, party and so on and so forth, and then they get themselves involved in rituals and very terrible things. Okay, yeah, and our society wasn't like that. It wasn't at all. Chika Onigwe gave this talk some time back at Nkato Mibe, a monthly interactive session that
Yeah.
happened for memories in Enugu. She talked about the fact that years back in Igbo, we had core values, cultural values. People valued education, people valued leadership, people valued reputation and integrity, family reputation than wealth. That's why in Igbo will say, easier for Kego. Only when
Mm-hmm.
man the Konyo. Okay, good name is better than wealth. When you have someone, you are greater than someone who has money. Okay,
Yeah.
and that's why back then you find a school principal or a headmaster who had nothing in his bank account, but could call someone who was his student and then get something done. Okay, he's respected, he's valued. But today in society, we don't value teachers, we don't value lecturers, we don't value professors, we don't value writers, we don't value engineers, we don't value lawyers. We value only those who are wealthy, regardless of how they make that money.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, Kubana, one of the wealthiest Nigerians, or young Nigerians, had a birthday party, his 50th birthday party. And what we were celebrating were wealthy Nigerians coming to throw dollars and euros and pounds and naira at him, and that's what we celebrated. Okay, every Nigerian were wowing and clapping and wishing they were like them. Okay, and this forced young people into going to be like him. Okay, so what do they do? They don't want to work hard like he did. Of course, we know his story. We know how he made his money working hard, building chains of business and so on and so forth.
For a
But
very
find
long
out
time. And he didn't even come to
a
the
very long time.
limelight. He didn't even come to the limelight up until the mom's burial. And for many
Yes.
persons, and all of a sudden they want to make it in a year, in 6 months.
Yes. Yeah, I know of a young man whose brother invited me to their house to help them build put up this structure. And while I was doing that, he was a nobody. He was doing nothing. He had dropped out of school, always lazing about at home. And the year after, his brother told me he had bought a Mercedes, and had bought lands. And I asked what he did. He said he was into internet fraud, and less than a year he went mad. Why did he go mad? Because he got himself involved in rituals and some terrible things. Okay, so that is the challenge we have in the south. And then in the north, like you mentioned, the issue of the Amajiri system, the nomadic system, and the failure of the leadership at that place to see that this is a terrible situation for them, that is crippling their society, their growth, and they don't want to let go, because if they let go, most young people there, most children, they will become educated and fight them. So they want the system to continue so that a few of them who are the elites will continue, their children will continue to enjoy the commonwealth or the entire north. That is the problem. Okay, so I think we need to begin to, and again, even though you mentioned that we should look for another for an alternative to leadership, another concept that could save the country, but again, it rests on the shoulders of leadership. We need a leader that will reorientate us, that we look at himself and we see an example of what he's trying to preach. Okay, you're telling us not to be materialistic, and we see you live it.
Mm-hmm.
You lived. You cannot tell us to try to to manage the situation that the economy is poor, and you're buying a yacht, you're buying more private jets, you're building more presidential lodges, and then your family gets the juiciest of political positions in the country and so on and so forth, and your friends are accused of assault, sexual assault, criminal offenses, corruption, and so on, and then you look the other way. Okay, so what do you expect young people to do? So you tell a young person not to get involved in okide and rituals and in internet fraud and trying to make money quick, whereas there is nothing for him. He sees your children living abroad. You visit your children abroad to take photos, okay, at their graduation, and he's here. He watches you do that, and he can't even afford to go to school himself. And you tell him not to get himself involved in rituals.
It's so sad that someone like Akpabio, alongside with our brother Senator Nwebonyi, played out the way they played out, and everything is just fine. The right thing to do when you are accused of such heinous crime is to step down first and then get this matter redressed.
Since I was a kid, I've not seen a Nigerian politician who steps down when because they were accused of a crime. I haven't. I don't think so. I'm trying to think, but I haven't. I haven't seen a Nigerian politician who said, "Okay, I'm going to step aside until an investigation is concluded and they find out that I am innocent. I am not guilty of this offense or that offense." I've not seen that, and it rubs off on us, the younger generation, because if we grew up seeing leaders who step aside to be investigated, we'll have to do the same. We'll do the same. But if we grow up seeing leaders who hold on to power at all costs, we saw Obasanjo try to hold up to power to get a third term. Okay, we clap for Jonathan because he correlated Buhari and step aside, which is a normal thing to do, a natural thing to do. But today we clap for him, we say he was a great president. Okay, because he did the right thing, a natural thing to do, because it was clear you lost the election. Okay, but we need more of such examples.
Yeah.
Okay, so, the Nwebonyi Akpabio thing is, and then someone who is at the center of such saga gets sent to the
To
Vatican
Rome.
to represent the entire country at the funeral of Pope Francis.
And I saw
Okay,
your
and
post.
then
It's Obu Obere Diego. I
yes,
saw your post,
yes.
and like
So
it's
what do you expect my generation to do? We look at them as our model, okay, and these are the people who groom us, who are going to hand over to us. So we're not going to turn out differently. I'm sad to say that. I'm sorry to say that.
if you go to the Nigerian National Human Rights Commission, I don't know if it's still there. I attended a conference some years ago, and then just outside you see the meter of crime. Sexual scandals are ranked, I think, just below murder. So you have murder number 30, you have stuff like rape number 29, 27, 26. You get assault before you start talking about bullying and other things that comes to get it to number one. Shannon recently has been accused in the United States of an assault, 2010 or thereabout. He stepped down from the breakfast podcast and all that, wanting to wait and see what would come out of it. We've had a couple of other persons down there who've been accused for right and for good and for bad reasons, stepping out. But we live in this part of the world where it's like you find women campaigning and championing that Natasha doesn't know what she's talking about without even looking at the crux of the matter. And it just begins to leave me with this sense of trepidation and sadness, because if you look at the council of Umuada, you will see the idea of women rallying around women and wanting to get justice for their fellow women who probably by one thing or the other have been maligned by their husband or by people around them. And it was even so it was even so strong that when I was reading the doctoral thesis of Dr. Ife, who wrote that became a book, She even talked about the concept of men cannot really hold meeting about the society without a woman representing the Umuada. But when the Umuada are holding their meetings, no man is allowed to come to the meeting. So it was that inclusive. And all of a sudden, 10, 20 years ago, she wrote that in 1987. 20 years, 30 years, 40 years down the line, you are having women come out to chastise their own fellow woman. And it begins to speak of Stockholm syndrome and all that. But if we had to push out from there a bit and look at the likes of Seku and the likes of Evangelist Chuba, yeah, how do we contrast this? Because why I lay great emphasis on this particular work down here is it captures Nigeria. Like you've rightly said, it should be a book that should be in print and out of print, just like our own lives, just like the morning and the evening gets to come and go. But we are in the part of the world where we are, and things are just the way they are. Because I think it captures everything Nigerian the same way Half of a Yellow Sun captured the Biafran War to a large extent, and the same way New York, My Village by Akpan Wem captured the peripherals of the Biafran people. What do religious leaders stand to gain in the current system we find ourselves, and what do they stand to lose if they don't do the things they are doing? And how will Nigeria be better if we look at religiosity and religion the way we are supposed to look at them? I know you reflect a whole lot about your time in St. Teresa's Cathedral and your involvement in the church and all that. And there's a post I saw you recently did about you reading as a lay reader, and I can't really remember the context, and you were like calling people's attention to tell them that, oh, you've gone to church.
Okay, so in Satans and Shaitans, you find that what that book tries to do is to place religion at the center of crime in Nigeria, and that is true. Religious leaders in Nigeria are one of the most corrupt people, and that reflects deeply or strongly in the life of Mohammed Sekou for the Muslims and Evangelist Shuba
Mhm.
for the Christians. And they can argue as much as they want against it, but it's like the activities in the past years have shown that most of the crimes that happen in the south and the north are encouraged by religious leaders. Take for instance the Oki, they get money quick, ritualism,
Aqua
hungry.
and
You find that a young person of 22, 25, 26, 30 years old buys a massive car, comes to the church and donates ₦1 million, and the reverend father or the pastor accepts the money, prays over the car, and doesn't get to question how they got it. I graduated from the university in 2013, and in 2014 I got my first car. In 2014 I got my first car, and I went to my village to my priest, and I said he should pray for me, and he said no. I would like to know how you got money to buy your car, and I had to explain to him how I made the money to buy the car before he prayed for me. Okay, and I gave my dad an envelope of some money for the priest, the same priest in my village then, as a tithe. Okay, because my village is a poor village, and I wondered how he was able to survive. So I gave my dad an envelope to give to him, and he called me on phone and said, "I'm with your dad. He's wrote an envelope from you. So how did you make the money? Why are you giving me money?" I said, "Okay, I got a book deal, and they paid me, and I'm trying to give you some money from it." Okay, but how many priests are like that? How many priests can question where the donation to the church is coming from? So they want to rule the church, and someone is offering you 5 million naira. How many priests today can question how did you get 5 million that you're offering us?
that's your
And
that's the
same with
entire book deal you got for your recent publication that is set to come out.
no. This was in 2014.
No,
That
no, no.
was
I mean,
from
I mean, I mean, I mean, I mean, the sum of 5 million is even about the deal you signed recently for your work, and somebody's just entirely giving it out away, and then nobody's questioning where it's coming from.
yes. Okay, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, and even more than that, if you find a young person buy a Mercedes for his pastor, and the pastor accepts it without asking, so what do you do? And the same to the family. You find a mother who knows that their daughter does nothing for a living, and then he buys you a jewelry, he buys you a motorcycle or a car, and then you accept it. So you encourage the child to continue to do. In fact, a few years back, I gave a woman a lift, and she said, I admire you immensely. You're one of the most hardworking young people we know here, and I'd like you to mentor my child. I said, okay, that would be great. Um, I said, in what area would you like me to mentor your child? She said, in Yahoo Yahoo. And I said, but I don't do internet fraud. And she was surprised. So I stopped and then parked by the roadside. And I told her am a civil engineer, I'm a writer, and these are the things I do, and that's how I make my money. I'm not very rich. Okay, and she was shocked, and she said she didn't expect that a young man like me would not be into internet fraud and be comfortable. So she had expected I could take her son and mentor her son. And I said, so assuming I were into internet fraud, you'd be comfortable with me mentoring your child in that? And she said, yes. I have an uncle, and then she said, I'm quoting her now. I have an uncle who is into fraud, but not internet fraud. This full time for what we call 419 in Nigeria.
Yeah, the main,
But
the main, the
he's very
main, the
rich.
main, the main deal.
Yes, yes. And she told me that he is very rich, but he has refused to mentor my son. So I think I shared this on Facebook back then, okay? And many people attested to the fact that others, mothers and fathers get to approach them, asking them to mentor their children in Yahoo, Yahoo, internet fraud, and so on and so forth. It's a terrible situation. And I'm sad to say that it continues because it's left unchecked. It's encouraged by our parents, encouraged by political and religious leaders. And so it's encouraged by political leaders because you find these people sponsoring political campaigns. I know my friends who are into fraud who sponsor political campaign. I'm telling you for it, they sponsor political campaign. They take money to politicians during campaign so that these people get into power. It's like the mafia war. Okay, so the mafians sponsor politicians so that politicians in turn protect them when they get into power. So that's
Yeah.
what's happening in Nigeria. And so I will give kudos to Governor Soludo, who has who is currently clamping down on some ritualists, some native doctors um, who who make charms and juju and for these people. Okay, so there is a need for us as a society to see religion as just a medium to communicate with God, but not take hold religious leaders to the highest esteem and abide in all of their words and obey all of their commands. Like we find in Satans Shaitans, people doing it for Evangelist Choba and Mohammed Seko.
Yeah. I tell people I don't want to grow up and be called an existentialist, either by way of writing or whatever. But Nigeria pushes that to you because you are brought in to look at what many persons don't get to look at. You are brought in to look at everything that, from the likes of Ilechi Amadi in his non-fiction and all that. These persons have written down the many years down the lane, and we are still here, and we are having Chimamanda tell us that the last time she was at the Nigerian Bar Association conference, she said Nigerians are bereaved of role models and good people to ordinarily look at, and the few persons who should be looked at are either in the hideout. And it reminds me also of Donald Trump's interview, where I think in the 80s or early 90s, when he was asked about whether he would be contesting for politics. Then he was still a very young man, and he said the best of persons are not the best of persons don't come out to politics because it's a dirty it's a dirty game, and it can rub on you on many fronts. So they just try to live their life in peace. And it reminds me of the last line by W.B. Yeats in the Second Coming. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. And you begin to look at these situations, and they say this thing so with so much energy, and they say this thing with so much passion. It's as if the louder you are, the truer you tend tend to be believed and the way they get to see your life down there. But how do you research into these sensitive issues? How how long does it take you to research into these issues? I know Nigeria can give you all the materials handy
Yeah.
without even needing to do so much research. Recently, Ike posted something about you just have to distance yourself a bit from the problem, and there's enough resources already to look at. And without even being starved of inspiration, you look at the Russian literature and Russian writers. They were not looking for so much inspiration. They had all the existential crisis in the 18th and 19th century, and you just pick up Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment, and it takes you back to Russia. But do you really go into deep research, or you have all the materials you need already?
Yes, Nigeria, you like rightly mentioned, is a very fertile ground to nurture creativity. Okay, to be very creative, yes, because there is assault every day in Nigeria. There is kidnapping, rape, murder, corruption, terrorism, banditry, all sorts of evil happen in Nigeria. Unchecked, Nigeria is one place you can commit a crime and there's this channel on DSTV, and then I can't remember the name, but they have this show where they show crimes committed even in the 60s and 50s and 40s, and years after the perpetrators are brought to book. Nigeria is one
Mm-hmm.
place where it is easy to be a criminal. You can be a criminal in Nigeria for 50 years, nobody will get to find out. You can be a serial killer in Nigeria for 50 years, unless God wants you to be caught. Because we don't have the system. The system is not functional. There is no forensic lab here. We don't have forensic labs. We don't have good investigators. We don't even have the patience. Our police system don't even have the patience to investigate crime. So this is a country where all sorts of evil and crime and violent activities happen unchecked, and people go. And for instance, now we have these tag unknown gunmen. So Obinna Udenwe gets shot on his way for a morning run, and the police takes the file and writes unknown gunmen, and there's no investigation. So you don't want to find out if he had a friend that he quarreled with that, or a business partner that he had an issue with. They just say unknown gunmen, and that is it. No investigation, nothing. So this is a fertile ground for creativity to grow. So as a creative, it is easy for me to come up with a story for my short stories ideas or for a novel idea. Then, but do we do research? Yes. For a book to be well accepted, to appeal to a wider audience, to make sense, you need to also do your research. So you want to write about terrorism. If you read Satans Shaitans, you think the author is a Muslim.
I wanted to ask you if you've lived in the north beyond Abuja.
No, I haven't. I haven't. But then you have to read the Hadith to understand Islam very, very well. Okay, the
Yeah,
activities
yeah.
of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to you have to read the Quran to understand um the teachings of Islam. Okay, and to be able to write a book like that that will not be biased against Islam as a religion, you have to read these holy books. Okay, to and research Islam very, very well. To research terrorism, and then what that book tries to do is to poke at jihad. Is there a relationship between jihad and terrorism? And that book explains it that there is no relationship at all between the two. That it is because of man's personal gain or yeah, that drives some religious leaders to or most men to try to equate jihad to terrorism. But if you understand Islam very, very well, you see that there is no relationship between the two. Okay, terrorism means to kill. You kill people. Jihad is to strive, and there are forms of jihad. As if you read Satans Shaitans, you understand that.
Yeah, yeah.
So we live in very terrible times. So and these terrible activities happening in our country feeds our creativity, okay, and then nurtures our creativity and helps us to put out these stories, okay. But for these stories to be widely accepted, for them to make sense, you have to research them very, very well. So if you read Colors of Hatred, you think the author has lived, someone was perhaps in Sudan, but I have never been to Sudan, okay. So you have to really research about what you want to write about. If you're a musician, you want to write a music about a particular concept, you have to research it. If there's this song of Burna Boy, I can't remember which one, where he gave a brief history of Nigeria. Okay, that Nigeria
The
is
monsters they made. I think it's the monsters they made or something like that. We are the monsters
yeah,
you made. I can't.
no, I don't think that's the one. I think it's the one where he talked about
The
Unilever.
amalgamation.
Yes, the amalgamation, Unilever as a company, and so on. How much they were paid to acquire the Niger
Yeah,
area
I know the song,
as
but
a
I can't
company,
remember
and
the
so on and
title
so
at
forth.
the moment. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So he narrates this story before he starts the song, and it's very very beautiful and poignant, very poignant. Okay, so and that's what makes him the African giant. Okay, that ability to speak intelligently in his songs. Okay, so
Yeah.
for every creative out there, it's good to research. You cannot take away the importance of research in trying to put out any creative work.
It's so sad that times are the way they are. To borrow from Bob Dylan, times are changing, and times have changed greatly
Yeah,
in our own part of the world, and the ways in which we get to do things, and the ways in which we tend to live our lives, and how we go. With rising religious extremism globally, what lessons should we pick from this particular work of yours before we look at more the works in recent times, and we look at your long forms of writing short stories, because it was a very very interesting concept when the book was to be published, when you were putting out snippets out there as to how you write short stories but in the long form. Not many persons try to capture
right
such
in the long.
scenarios in whereby they write short stories in the longer form as opposed to the shorter form. And when the book came out, it was received well for a place like Nigeria, and we hope it continues selling. I don't know the stats at the moment, and I hope it continues to sell. And we also talk about the cost of affording books. I know it's one of the key stuff you talked about, changing publishers as it concerns the price of books and what that really means to you. And when I read that particular piece from you, it was very very touching to see that it's to be read first. Every artist craves an audience, and so when the price is pitched against the art, it becomes an elitist venture left for a few persons to get to afford. How how do you how do you respond to situations whereby, you know, occultism on one hand, political power on the other hand, and then also global religious extremism on the other hand?
I think what that book tries to do at the end is to educate the citizens that beyond what you see, okay, there are a lot that could be going on, okay, beyond this church, this big church or movement, religious movement, there are lots going on, okay. It's like Nathan's born on a Tuesday, where you have an imam who organizes this Amajiri. But beyond that, there are sinister activities going on. So that's what Satans Shaitans tries to do. Okay, to say that some of these things are interlinked: occultism, religion, big institutions, and so on. And that's on the one hand. You find out there is one remarkable thing about Satans and Shaitans that not everybody tries to understand. You have like two stories, and then at the end they come together or they intertwine. The love
Hmm.
life between Adeline and Donaldo, and
Sure.
then the story of religious extremism, and then they come together to intertwine. You find that Donaldo was able to do what he did because of the kind of grooming he had, the kind of education he had, the kind of lessons he had growing up from his father. Okay, so that's also you find that in the north in the book, the kind of grooming Mohammed Soko was given to those the boys he was using to commit terrorism or terrorist acts. So we as parents or as young people need to broaden our horizon. Because if Donaldo was allowed to live his life to the fullest, he would have had a broader mind to understand that he didn't need to kill that line to come out of that terrible situation they found themselves in.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. And those who were being brainwashed by Mohammed Seko would have, if they had education and a broader mindset, a broader knowledge, they would have found that he was tweaking the Holy Quran in a way to suit his teachings for his personal gain at the end.
Before we talk about your short story collection, the idea of the Village Square Journal in those in the times you thought about the idea and those you collaborated with to come about them Amara and or Semona or Sem or Semona. Yeah,
Osemon,
yeah, and Osemome, yeah, that's correct. I just remembered the name now. The times you guys thought about this idea, what was running through your mind the period leading up to that particular to the particular establishment of that, and then you also have worked on the establishments of Mbedi Review and all that. But first, the Village Square Journal, and then your involvement in the establishment of the latter.
okay, yeah, so thank you. Um, Osemome and I met at the Fidelity Bank International Creative Writing Workshop in 2011. It used to be funded by the Fidelity Bank and then hosted by Helen Habila. Okay, that was when Chimamanda Adichie was being funded by Nigerian Breweries to host the Farafina Creative Writing Workshop. So they were the two biggest workshops in Nigeria: the Farafina Creative Writing Workshop and the Fidelity Bank International Creative Writing Workshop. So Osama and I met and formed a writers collective. Myself, Osimome, Ekodena Basi, and Choma Iwuzibiam. The three of them are now studying in the US
Yeah.
for their PhD or masters in MFA in creative writing in the US. So, and then we kept in touch for a long time. But there was this common thing ongoing because we were all writers and we realized it was very difficult, increasingly difficult for us to, as much as we were good writers, to get our stories accepted in magazines and journals because most of these were foreign domicile magazines. Okay, and we felt it would be good to try to create something. The only one there were just a few very good magazines. The Kalahari Review in Africa back then, and Brittle Paper. Brittle Paper was doing amazing job back then. So, and then we came up with the Village Square Journal, and we had very big dreams for it. Okay, and as at that time, Osimhen was still in Nigeria. We brought in Ngafo, who was in the UK. We brought in Mama Simbada, a Zimbabwean living in Canada, but as at that time she was in Zimbabwe. And then we ran the journal for a few years, and Norma Simbada left Zimbabwe for Canada. Ngum became a nurse and got involved with NHIS in the UK and became very busy. And the summer left for the US and started working and schooling, and things became increasingly difficult for us to run the magazine. And we were funding it ourselves. We were tasking ourselves monthly to run the magazine, and that was a challenge. So, but the idea for starting the magazine was to provide a platform for diverse voices to thrive, for us to publish not just Nigerians or Africans, but people from any other part of the world. Okay, and we, for a great extent, succeeded in doing that. Okay, and now we are trying to revive it again to that Amarachimeka and I, who currently is my publisher because she runs Publishers, my current
Yeah.
publisher. We're trying to revive the Village Square Journal. We're going to do that this year. We are redesigning the website. We are redesigning everything, and it's going to come out bigger and better. So I like to. I'm someone who is in love with journals and magazines because I believe they give opportunities for young voices to thrive, to discover new voices. Because a writer could submit a very beautiful story to the New Yorker and get rejected. Not because the story isn't good, but because he is largely unknown. But if there is a young magazine, a body magazine, or a journal that he could submit to and get accepted and published, he could thrive. My short story was made into a film in South Africa by Bomb Films. It has to do with Emilia, which is published in The Widowhood of Azamau. That story was published in Afreda, and the producer read it in Afreda. Afreda is a small magazine in the UK, owned by a Nigerian and a few Africans. Okay, they read the story, they loved it, and they contacted me and said, "We would like to make a film out of it." Okay, so these magazines, no matter how small they are important because they provide a platform for writers to put out their creative work out there. For the Ebony Review, I was a resident in 2014, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
When this person won the prize for posthumously, right? What's
right,
his name? I've
yeah,
forgotten his name now.
yeah. So Pauline and I were residents, and while there we admired what Dr. Wale Kedron was doing with the residency. It was at that time the only residency in Nigeria, as large as Nigeria is, one of the biggest economies in Africa or in the world. Okay, we had just one writer's residency, and the residency had turned out very amazing. Igoni Barrett, I think Nathan John was on the residency at some point. Very wonderful Chika Onigwe, very wonderful writers. Simone Devici, Kwadiana Bassi, many great people. Okay, and we felt, okay, why not come up with a magazine or a journal that could have these creatives submit their works once in a year, and then there will be a magazine that would catalog what they produce every year. At some point, we also grew it to accept other people who are not the residents of a baby. Okay, so and that's it. Copies of or editions of the review are wonderful because that's one review in Nigeria that you have very amazing, aside the annual review anyway, that you have wonderful authors, well-known authors contributing to. I know when Ayobaba Adebayo was still starting, before she published her first book, Stay With Me, okay, we published her in the Ebony Review. In fact, her photo was the cover image for the review. And then the next year she published Stay With Me and went on to become a global icon.
Yeah, it's very important we have these conversations about magazines and all that, and structure also. And you've talked about funding, and just like when Okada Books folded, it was like one of the most saddest stuff that happened.
Yeah.
I didn't.
And that was where you could get holy sex, okay,
Yeah,
easily. Like
yeah.
holy sex was just selling for 300 naira, 500 naira on Okada books.
That was
And
why that was why I read Holy Sex, and it was like
now,
something else. And
now there's no way you can. I think it's on Amazon. Okay, aside Amazon, I don't think there's any place in Nigeria could easily go and read Holy Sex. And it's not a print book. Okay, as beautiful as that work is, it's not in print. Okay, so the shutdown of Okada books is a big blow to African literature.
and when you look at people like G.K. Chesterton, you look at people like C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis published the Screwtape letters in different segments, and it was published in a newspaper, in a journal, bit by bit up until the end. And that's how most of these persons get to function. Even Dostoevsky, at a point, published most of his works. Like, let's say they give you a column on the Guardian, and then that particular section is dedicated to books, and after a very long period of time, you collect everything together. Same thing also happened to Chimamanda. She did collections of short stories. They weren't written entirely like you had the contract with Masobe to write a complete work. Her works came out of different journals and different magazines to be compiled together.
Yeah, basically
And
that's how it works for a collection. Rarely would you find a writer who sit down to write a collection of stories. In fact, it's just recently that it's becoming a norm. Before, you'd when you feel you've grown as an author, you collate your stories published in different journals and magazines together to form a collection. Okay, but recently you find like the Professional Glenn Che Prize. No, not the Glenn Che Prize, the Ras Schumacher Prize, the Professional Ras
yeah,
Schumacher Prize that
yeah,
that calls for a collection of stories. There's a collection of story prize called the Professional Ras Schumacher Prize. Okay, and then other
yeah,
prizes like that. So it enables an author to sit down to say, okay, let me do a collection, or like what Masobe did. that the publisher met me and said, okay, I've read a few of your stories and I am in love with them. Can you do us a collection? And I sat down and did. Okay, so you can't take away the importance of magazines and journals. Okay, because and there are authors who do not produce long works like a full-fledged novel that only know
Mm-hmm.
how to write short stories. So how do they get their works out there for people to read and appreciate them? It's through magazines and journals. So they are very, very important. But the challenge we have, especially here in Africa, is that of funding. And I listened to one of your talks the other time about the lack of grants and funds for creativity in Africa. In Nigeria, especially in the southern part of Nigeria, and in the southeast in particular in Igbo land, you find very wealthy men who cannot even fund a museum in their place. They cannot fund a library in their place. This morning, my daughter told me that she would like to visit the library. But I cannot probably take her to my state library because it's a very massive building that is a waste. There is nothing in it. Now, the
In
only place I
Abakaliki,
can take,
you mean the one at GRA?
yes, it's a waste of a place. There is no electricity. There are no books there. The only place I can take her to is the Hope Bay Library that is run by owned by one person, Barrister Ono John Onwe. Okay, but that is for Abakaliki. I don't think there are many states that you would find that you will not find a
A library.
privately owned where someone can go to and read. Someone yesterday, this just yesterday, someone wrote on Facebook about Nnewi, where you have hundreds of billionaires and there is no single library in Nnewi. There is no museum in Nnewi. There is no theater in Nnewi. There is no cinema, and so on and so forth. And then we fund convoy of cars, and we fund exotic parties, and throw money at people, and so on and so forth. So we missed the priority, and we bemoan our fates that our children turn out badly, and so on. How do they turn out badly when they're not being encouraged to read? I know growing up, we used to lend books. We used to exchange books among our
Sure.
friends, and that was the culture. I grew up seeing a very massive bookshelf in my house, okay, filled with books, and then I'll go to my friend's house. I'll see it as well. In my house, today, there's a very massive bookshelf in my room, and my children grow up. They see books, but how many young persons today have bookshelves in their homes, and their children grow up seeing books? So what we do
You
is we
can
buy gadgets for them
you
at
see
the age of
plasma TVs, you see
uh,
exorbitant dining tables, luxurious chairs. While all these stuffs are not bad, but there's no presence of books. You don't
books.
stir their imaginations, you give them a sense of neuroplasticity, and then their neurons get to be rewired in different ways, but
Yes.
the curiosity is gone.
And that's how we build the fast life because when we buy them these gadgets, they play the games and they everything moves so fast. And that's they think life is like that. Everything it should or is supposed to be very fast. So I think we have missed the point as a people and we need to get back to it. And magazines and journals are very strong tools that can help us do that.
Wow. So Masobe reached out to you, asked you to put up this beautiful collection of stories, 11 stories, right?
Yeah.
In long forms. How long did it take you to write?
Well, my somebody asked me to write in the long form, but
No, I'm not
I
talking about the long form. I'm talking about how long it took you to do the compilation of these
not
particular
all of the
stories.
stories were written when Masobe approached me. There were stories that were in existence already. So when
Sure.
Masobe and I met in Abuja at Adam's
Adam's
Pages,
page.
yes, Adam's Pages, a bookshop in Abuja. Okay,
Yeah.
and he said, "I'd like you to give me a collection." I and convinced me. But before then, he had been talking with my editor, who is now my publisher, about me giving him a collection or publishing a collection of short stories from me. I And then after he convinced me, I sent him what I had, and he wanted a story that is tilted towards a particular direction, like you have in the collection. So he
Yeah.
seemed that what he want, and we needed to make it up. So I now sat down to write the rest. Okay, so it didn't take much long, just a few months.
Why did you pick the woman who died with flowers in her mouth? That story and then the title. How did it come
I,
about?
I wasn't the one, to be honest. I wasn't the one who as the title. as the title of the book. Okay, it was one of the persons who edited it, Oris. You know Oris, the
Yeah, I know
popular
Oris. I know Oris.
film critic.
Yeah,
Critic.
yeah, yeah.
It was
Oris
Oris.
claim Oris claimed to have not turned 40.
It was Oris who at some point was asked to edit the collection. As at that
Okay.
time, the collection was titled one of the stories in the collection. What's the title then? All good things come to an end.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
I think that was the title. As at that time, all good things come to an end. Okay, so it was Oris who said, "Why don't we go with the title "The Widow Who Died with Flowers in Her Mouth"?" And I was like, "Great, let's do that."
When it came out, it was a very, very long title, right? I've seen other titles that are long, but it was so, I was like, okay, what will happen? But then she died with flowers in her mouth in the story itself. Who would kill somebody and leave flowers in the person's mouth?
For the collection and in most of my stories, and I've also come to realize that it's also like that in my novels. You find that there is always a cliffhanger at the end.
Yeah.
I do not. I'm one of the authors who believe that it's not my responsibility to resolve the story for you, because because there are diverse readers, okay, different kinds of people who read. So, and I want them to finish reading the story and have different takeaways from it. Okay, I want your experience reading my work to be different from the experience of, say, an Amina or a Grace or an Aisha and so on and so forth. So so for me, I attempt to write the story and leave a cliffhanger. So, and if you ask me why who killed the lady, I am as confused as you are. Okay.
And I've seen that people have asked this in your comment section, and you're like, you're giving us the same answer still.
Yes, I don't know. Okay, and the story comes to me and ends like that. Even in my book, the one that is coming out, Years of Shame,
Oh,
it ends
shame.
like that. It leaves you bewildered. It leaves you confused. It leaves you worried. I want my story. I want my book to leave you in a state of worry and wonder. So 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 what's up? You ask. So yeah, and then sometimes it generates conversation, and people argue about it. Sometimes I go for readings, and people argue about the ending. They come up with different endings for themselves, and that intrigues me.
It's just like how people get to look at the end of Half of a Yellow Sun and ask themselves, what happened to Kainene? Where is
Yeah,
she? Is she ever going to come back? But in reality, that was what happened during the war. Not
yeah.
everybody came back. Some
Everybody came.
persons went missing, but this is a novel, and you're expecting the author to probably do have mercy on such a beautiful character, but people went missing in
Mhm.
such situation, both missionaries who came and then those who were volunteers from the country itself, as far as Cameroon, as far as um, Biafra was concerned, many persons went missing and they never came back. And but this idea, the flower, was it meant to symbolize a beauty in grief, or the burden of expectations
That,
laden
that,
and
that I
placed on
can
women?
that I can answer.
Okay.
What I can't answer is who killed her. But the flower I can answer, I think but that's my thinking. Any other breeder can come up with a different idea. I think that the person who killed her wanted to. What I think is that one of the suitors killed her. That's what I think. That one of those men killed her, and I think they tried to to send a warning out there that, okay, you can't take me, but you valued this British engineer, okay, who gave you flowers, okay, and to send a warning to him that if I can't have her, you can't have her.
So kind of
That's
like
my
a sense of distortion.
yes, that's my explanation of it. Okay, but different readers can come up with different ideas of why the killer had to put flowers in her mouth, and that's the beauty of the story. It's like it has to do with Emilia, which what most of the readers find very interesting, very
Yeah.
interesting. and which I think was why it's made into a film. At the end, it's difficult to analyze what happened to Emilia, if Emilia is alive, if she's dead, and if there is a suicide note, because the guy Temitayo doesn't get to see the suicide notes in that story. Okay, so so different people come up with different ideas, and I like that in the film it's not also resolved. Okay, it's not also resolved, which is interesting because in Haruki Murakami's a short story which I admire immensely. What's the title? Where this a guy has a friend, a female friend who does mimes, and then one day she travels to Africa and then comes back with a friend, and they visit him, and then the friend tells him that. Um, okay, band burning. Yes, tells the narrator that, oh, sometimes I burn bands, and then after a while the narrator can't find the friend again, the girl, and it happens that we think that when he mentions that he burns bands, that what he was trying to convey, the information he was trying to convey to the narrator was that he kills women. I encourage you to read it. It's one of the most beautiful stories ever written by any human being on earth.
Um,
Yes, there's a film about it, but what I'm trying to say is that in that film, it's resolved. Okay, it's resolved, but in it has to do with Emilia, which also ends the way band burning ends
yeah.
in story form. Okay, but in the film form, it's not resolved. Okay, so when you see it has to do with Emilia as a film, you still end up with that sense of longing for the ending that is not there. And that cliffhanger appears in all the stories in that collection and in most of my stories, even in my novels. Because you find, even in Satans Shaitans, that unresolved nature of the story. Okay, in Colors of Hatred, you wonder if Adeline finally gets the absolution, if she finally confesses to
Mm-hmm.
her husband's people what she has done. Okay, so and in Years of Shape that is forthcoming, that's even the way it is multiplied. Okay, it's unresolved to a great extent, and the reader is left with a lot of speculation.
Wow, wow. It's a whole lot down there, but how far can men go to please a woman in the
Eh, eh,
society we live in now?
yes, the collection of stories, the widowhood that plows him out. When you open the book, you find a quote there: "Men are fools who better careers for the answer."
It's actually, I didn't want her to call the quote directly. I
Yeah,
wanted you to think it
so
out yourself. Like,
I think that quote answers your question.
what is this? I grew up with Mr. Ignatius, like in school, not as if I grew up with him, but he used to say, "Belle so shit." That's the insult he normally gives to students those days when we were growing up. He say, "See your belly so shit." That was his own way of telling you in class when you don't know what you're saying. But what is this obsession with? It's something I cannot. I'm a man myself, but at the same time, it drives. You see it in different places. Even when Chimamanda was even talking about Dear J. Wale, that's the Feminist Manifesto. He still reference bottom power. But what is the importance and the effect of bottom power when there are no men to ordinarily patronize that? Will there ever come a time when this particular puzzle will be resolved where, men will just want to mind their business?
No, no, no. In fact, I believe that if you remove women in the world, it will become a terrible place to live in.
Look at our music.
Yes, I don't think I would like to live in a world where there are no women.
Me
Okay.
too. I don't.
Yes, I believe they are beautiful people created by God to make this place a very, very tolerable place. If there are no women, we would kill ourselves because women are there to calm us down in very many ways, sexually, emotionally, psychologically. Okay, they it's like the positive and negative. Okay, so imagine where a world where you have all women. Imagine it. I think we can do a story about it. A world where there are just all women, or a world where you have all men. So imagine if God hadn't created Eve and there was just Adam, and then maybe somehow some even Adam kept on replicating, reproducing. Just I don't know, perhaps God would have fashioned out a way for him to reproduce or maybe would have been creating other Adams and been dropping, and then you have a world full of men.
I
I
don't
think
want to
that,
live in that world.
so yeah, so I don't think I like to live in a world. Uh, Women are beautiful, they are powerful, and they are a necessity. Okay, I
Great.
don't think the word a necessary evil because they are also our undoing. And you find that in the collection, you find the quest to get to have a woman and how he has resorted to our undoing mostly. Okay, he has brought down a lot of powerful men. Okay, and it's going to still do that to a lot of us. So the bottom line, yes, it's there. It's there. It's very strong. It's inevitable. We can't. There's no time in the world where a man is going to outgrow the powers of women. And I want to believe that most powerful men in the world are controlled by women, either their girlfriend, their mistresses, their wives, and so on, more than they are controlled by their advisors and men around them. And it's natural, just very natural.
Was it the president of Zambia or Zimbabwe who had to come on national TV to tell people that he has only one wife, and the woman was just standing there by his side, all moody and with her face looking at the camera. I can't remember the country, but it's one of these countries
Oh, I didn't say.
close to Zimbabwe or something like that. And she just wanted him to reassert this love for him and disown all side chicks, imaginary or real. And
I think women would benefit more from understanding that men are terrible human beings. I believe that men are scum, even though I'm a man. So, and the high time women began to realize that they better for them, because no matter you cannot please a man enough. You cannot please a man enough. Okay. Yeah. So I think you're going to be giving yourself headache by trying to get him to say you're the only person.
do women really know the power they have? Like, whether it's bottom power or whatever seductive power, do they really fully realize
They
the
do.
extent?
They do, yes. They do. They do. And that's why they are able to control us. They do.
Wow, that's that's a deep one there to take for a young man growing up.
Yeah.
Were these themes, drawn from personal experience, broadly from observation, or that simply are just stories that demanded you to tell them?
Well, I would say all of the above, yeah. I've had very wonderful experiences. Okay, recently I wrote a story. It's a creative non-fiction titled "Telling a Sex Worker About My Six Wives." I'm trying to do a collection of non creative fiction that will be a mix of fiction and non-fiction. So recently I was in a hotel in Asaba, and there was a knock on my door around 12, 1 or 2, I can't remember. And this beautiful lady walked in and said and asked if I would like sex. Okay, so I've made that into a story, telling a sex
Oh,
worker. So I invited her in, and then I brought her whiskey, Jameson, and then we sat down, and then we had a very wonderful long conversation for a very very long time in my room. Okay, and then I made that into a story. Okay, so most of my stories are based on experiences, some on inspiration, some on most of them on observation. So I see a woman, I look at her, look at how she's built, and when I'm putting up a story, I try to mirror that woman, or a man with like Mohammed Seko who has hairs
yeah.
going out his ears. Okay, I was once in a bus and I was staying beside a man like that. Okay, so that image gets imprinted in my memory, and then when I'm writing a story, I replicate it. So all of the above, yes.
How important is the role of setting in short stories? Because in a long form novel you have enough time to play around, but in short story collections the settings tend to be kind of more difficult to get to work on. How do you go about setting this?
Well, yeah. The idea is to not overdo it. To just you don't need to let the reader know. So there are very many ways. So I try to teach this when I'm invited to teach creative writing at workshops. So for instance, when you read some of the stories in the collection, you find out it says one of the stories says the night Dylan Roof shot some worshippers in a church in Charleston. That already sets the story. You already know around when that thing happened. If you follow the news, you remember
Yeah,
that young man who went to a church in Charleston and shot
yeah.
some worshippers. Yeah.
Sure,
Okay, so
sure.
I write the story and say the night Pope Francis died,
Like
they were killed his girlfriend. So I don't need to go and tell you that happened in
it was
2020.
set in 2025 in April and stuff like that. You should already have an idea of that.
Yes, how the atmosphere was, the environment as at that time, everywhere was charged. People were in a state of sober reflection of on the death of the Pope, the Pontiff. So that sets the mood for the story. Okay, yeah. So for short stories, you don't need to go into much details about the setting, try to describe the scene and so on and so forth. Just tell the story. For a novel, you have the liberty to do that. But for a short story, just tell the story.
Was there ever a story in this collection that started out as something longer and then you had to reduce it to form a short story, or is there something you are taking out of the short story collection now to something longer?
So
Maybe
that's what I have to look at the at the title and see.
maybe John 101.
No. Joanna one has always been very long. Yeah, that you're asking if there's a story that was long and it was
And
slowed
then you
down.
shortened it, or something that was a short story and that you are going to use it to form something longer, or you're just allowing them to be.
Mm, well, there is no story in this collection that was longer before it was put into the collection.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, but Years of Shame now, my forthcoming book, has some is derived partly from or the concept, one of the concepts behind Years of Shame is derived
Hmm.
partly from the story Things Not Seen. Yes, about a guy who sleeps with a woman, a doctor who falls in love with this woman, a patient, a married woman, and after a while becomes sick. Some knots is loosened from his head, and like he's mad. Okay, but not really mad per se. Okay, so in Years of Shame, you find a woman in love with a younger man, a woman in her 40s, in love with a man in his late 20s. And at the end, it turns out that he was her son. And this boy goes mad. Because in my place, in my part of Abakaliki, where I come from, if you sleep with your mother, you go mad. There is no two ways about it. You can run to Pope Francis, you can run to Benedict to pray for you, but you go mad if you sleep with your mother.
How does this play out in a time where we are so many persons are becoming so skeptical about events and how things are, that they don't really come to believe in almost anything, be it from church perspective or from traditional belief system. And I tell people that my sense of believing in God and believing in the supernatural didn't necessarily come from theological discourse and philosophical arguments. It comes from the place where I grew up. So how do people deal with this idea of, skepticism born out of not believing in this in the spiritual? Because my sense of believing in God and my sense of coming to terms with this metaphysical possibilities is born out of the place where I grew up and the things I saw happen. Things like one book here, things like Urumoje. These are deities in Cross River that go about doing things that many persons don't really think possible in maybe Abuja or in Lagos. But even in Lagos, there are a whole lot of traditional stuff that still go on.
After I finished writing Years of Shame, I sent it to one of the famous people in Nigeria. Okay, he's a public a policy expert, someone who is knowledgeable in Igbo cosmology and culture, and also has tried to bring that to the fore. So I sent him the book. I wanted him to give me a cover blog, and he read it, and he said he was not going to give me a cover blog. He said he didn't.
Why?
Yeah, I'm coming to that. He said he didn't understand how possible it is that a boy would sleep with the mother without knowing she was the mother and go mad. And that prompted me to do an author's notes that the reader gets to see after the book, okay, after reading the book. And in that author's note, I tried to explain this. He enjoyed the book. He sent me while he was reading. He was sending me WhatsApp messages to say how much he loves it. But he refused to give me the cover blog because he said part of what the book has addressed that he is agnostic and doesn't believe that it is possible that a young boy will sleep with the mother without knowing she is the mother and go mad. So that prompts me to do an author's note that the reader gets to read after reading the book, explaining this thing, these occurrences. Because there are parts of Nigeria where things happen and people who are not from there find it difficult reconciling it or understanding the possibility of these cosmological occurrences there. For instance, I know that there are places in Nigeria, including in Abakaliki, where I come from, and I know in some part of Edo, that a woman will sleep with another man that is not a husband and go mad or become sick, or the husband falls sick because your wife has committed adultery and you have no knowledge of it. But for the fact that your wife has committed adultery, you become sick or you begin to meet misfortune. These things are inexplicable. They're inexplicable. But so long as you're from there and the blood of that place runs through you, they must happen to you. So I cannot explain it myself. I've made inquiries, I've asked elders, people who are knowledgeable, who are elderly people who have experienced a lot of um, very fantastic things happen to them, and they say it's inexplicable. Recently, in my place, the ancestral leaders of my place made some incantations or some sacrifices to try to change the fact that if a woman sleeps with commits adultery, her son should not die or her child should not die. Because just recently, if a woman commits adultery here, she loses a child. And these things happen. There is no juju around it. There is nothing. So, and they said, look, they have to go to appease the land to try to perform some sacrifices. And after they did that, you would be surprised to know that somehow it's beginning to change. You find some women commit adultery and they lose their child, and for many others they don't. They themselves become sick after these elders made some of these sacrifices to try to change the course of this thing happening. So is it possible that if they make some sacrifices and prayers and say that it should stop, that if a woman commits adultery, nothing should happen to her, and that it's going to stop? Yes, it is possible, and that if they do that, it should stop. So this should not be the work of modernity and modern teachings. We should have a conversation with traditionalists to see how we get them to change some of these things if they are possible, okay, to align with modernity and civility.
Yeah, because many persons will not come to understand this. And still, to go back to G.K. Chesterton, the English writer, he gives this analogy of you going into a field and then you see a gate without a fence. And he gives the analogy of saying, don't bring down the gate. Understand it. Understand what happens down here. And also in the Death of the King's Horseman, you also see this particular place where there was a conversation about a white man destroying what he doesn't understand simply because he doesn't understand it without ordinarily wanting to look at what should be and what shouldn't be. We now, as young people growing up, Christianity has taken a great toll on us, Islam also, and agnosticism is there on one hand. Great persons also, people are becoming atheists also. We're having agnostic here and there, but these things get to happen one way or the other. I grew up in Cross River in Boki, and in the whole lot of conversation we've had one way or the other, people talk about Odeshi, and some persons claim that it doesn't work, but I have lived in a place that went through war, and it happened. The war between the Sadap, yeah, it happened. The war between the Sadap and Bujie in at the boundaries that leads to Cameroon had this war in 2009 and 2011. A whole community was wiped out, and then you have these conversations. Same thing is happening around the wars we're having with the people of Ukele, close to Ebonyi down there. You see these conversations and you see these dynamics. Is it the case that people shrink their sense of understanding the world to only empirical data, or they have just not really read enough or experienced things enough.
I think that what you do not know is greater than you. There are people who do not believe witches fly at night. But people from perhaps, I'm not trying to stereotype Edo people, but there are
Sure.
people from Edo who would tell you that it is possible and that it happens, that someone could fly at night because they are a witch. Okay? I don't believe in it. I've not seen it happen. But does that remove the fact that it is true? I don't think it removes from it. I don't think because I don't believe in it, it doesn't happen. I don't think so. I think it does happen. Okay? I think that the sooner we begin to realize that there are a lot happening in this world that we don't even know. It's like when you read about when you read Twilight about um, zombies. Okay, is it fiction? Yes. Is it possible that there is an underground in this world, or a set, or there are zombies living among us who go to our school, who when maybe after some years that we're going to suspect that they are supposed to have AIDS, they relocate to another country, another place. Is it possible? Yes. So there are a lot, just like you mentioned about Deshi. My community has fought a war with another community in Cross River, and I know young people, some of them my friends and relations, who had the juju in their body, and then you shoot them, and it doesn't penetrate their body. You take a machete and then try to slash them, and then it doesn't penetrate.
Listen,
It doesn't.
the only way you capture them and beat them to death
Yes, if you want.
before they get to die without accepting cuts. And after they are dead, you now can cut a head or a hand out of them.
Yes. So in conclusion, I think that some of these occurrences happen, but we don't believe because we've not experienced them. Yeah,
So we as people in the modern era should have conversations with traditionalists, like you rightly said, to look at the things that ordinarily can be changed.
yeah,
And those things that can be changed should be changed so that a particular group of persons will not live in a territory for as long as possible and not really come to understand the things not seen. Just like the title is
yeah,
captured in this
yeah,
collection, in this
yeah,
collection of your work down there.
yeah,
As a
yeah.
writer known for novels, thrillers, and provocative work like the ones you've put out down there, how do you shift from a particular tone to a different one? Do you work on style so much, or it's just something that has become part of you that you write the way you write and you move on that way?
I think that when you're starting up, you would find it difficult to master a particular tone. So
Hmm.
when you read the work of a budding author, unless those who are geniuses, you'd find different tones. But as you mature and continue at the craft, you find it streamlining. And one of the ways to do that is to find an author you admire immensely. For me, it is Haruki Murakami. When you read my stories, you find it tilted towards the tone of Haruki. For Abakadab Ibrahim, he says Gabriel Garcia Marquez. So you read his work, you think you're reading a Marquez. Okay, so I think it's to yeah, you can. Some people would say, "Oh, don't write like another author," but you cannot. It's difficult not to do that. Every author tries to write like someone who is better than them. Okay, and from there grow and become a master. Okay, so that when you read an Obinna, you say, "Oh, this is Obinna's work."
Yeah.
So if you remove my name from all of my stories and then give it to one person to read, they will tell you, "I think this is written by one person." Okay, so that's it. So it's mastery over time. It's like I always say writing is like mathematics. You do it over time and then you get to master it. So that when you're given a mathematical equation to solve, you don't even need the formula just comes to you and then you solve it straight away. But if you leave it, it leaves you.
What kind of shame does this new work speak of? The years of shame you're looking at down here. Is it a shame that is individual? Is it a societal shame, or is it a blend of both?
A blend of both, yes, because it tells the story of a man who, out of sheer stubbornness, took a dreaded ritual oath we call the Okpajukpanwa in
Mm-hmm.
our the oath of loss of wealth and children, and caused shame, brought shame upon himself and that of his family. for about 2 generations. Okay.
Wow. And these cultural beliefs are not beliefs you necessarily believe, but they are things that are explicitly seen in your culture.
Yes, yes, and that's the beauty of the book, because it's going to generate a lot of conversation, because it's not fiction, it's something that happens. People are going to attest to it. A lot of Catholic people are going to talk about it.
Wow, wow. It's interesting that like you've rightly said, the things you don't know are like bigger than the things you get to know, and it should leave you humble. And many persons are not humble by their
Yes,
level of
they
not
try to
not
question the integrity of what they don't know by saying, "Oh, it's not true, it doesn't happen," and so on and so forth. Like
I used
on Easter, I was with this uncle of mine who always speaks, who's on Catholicism, and he was talking about the Virgin Mary's appearance to the little children in Fatima,
Fatima, yeah.
yes, and some of the claims of the Maria appearing to people in
A
Nigeria.
lot and stuff, yeah.
And
Immaculate Conception.
no, not even about Immaculate Conception, but the I've forgotten the word it's called,
The
but
apparitions.
the apparitions, yes, thank you. And
Yeah.
he was attempting to question or to poke holes on that they are not true. He said that one had happened in Nigeria was a reflection from one roof to, and I said, look, uncle, there there could be ones that are not true, but you shouldn't say that all of them are not true. It's possible that some are true. Okay, it's like UFO
That's
that people claim, oh, they've seen UFOs. And science have tried to prove that it's not possible and so on and so forth. But what if it is possible? What if one of these observations of a UFO is possible? So I am someone who likes to believe that anything and everything is possible. We, we doubt because we have not experienced it. It's like
yeah,
in the
and
Bible,
that
when Thomas questioned that Jesus could have risen, and he said, come and touch
put
the
yeah.
from the fingers, yes. Yeah. And
I
when he
tell
touched
people
it, and he
okay.
believed. So without what we do not see. That's why that short story is titled Things Not Seen.
I tell people that you don't know my mom and I don't know your mom, just generally in very, very simple Catholic conversations or Christian conversations, when they start talking about the idea of, we have not seen God and so he doesn't exist. And I'm like, you don't know my mother, you've not seen my mother, but my mother exists and her existence is independent of your knowledge of her or not. So you cannot say there are no there are no other possibilities out of your own reach. Just like when you look at Nigeria, there are no metro stations, and then you tell people that metro stations don't exist
When
because
they,
you've not been to a country
yes, when they
that
exist.
yeah, and then
Have you questioned why someone would bring a particular, maybe a stump from a particular tree, bring some feathers, and then bring some red rope or white rope and tie the feathers around the stump, and then kill a chicken and sprinkle the blood on the stump and begin to talk to it, and after a while some things begin to happen. A force enters this stump and obeys his command. So you can ask that force to go and kill Obinna, and next Obinna is dead. It can ask the person can ask the stump to um to do anything, and it could be possible. To prevent him from
and
having accidents, and it could be possible.
and
But
it's not a thing tied to whether you believe it or not. It's
or
not
not,
things being is. I think that's what they say in philosophy. Being has been like being.
yeah.
Being is being is like it's like a tautology. But what they are trying to say is a thing is regardless of whether you know it or not, and it
Yes.
doesn't depend on your knowing
Like
it.
the existence of God. God exists, whether you agree or not. And they say only a fool says there's no God.
Yeah,
Yeah, so in extension we can say only a fool says what they do not know does not exist.
your Catholicism and your involvement in the church, as well as this concept of going back to going
Traditional.
back to the root. Yeah, going back to our roots. And many persons say this a whole lot, that this was not our tradition, this was not our culture. But we don't really have literatures to go back to a large extent. It's more or less transmitted or interpreted as anybody want to do. We've seen the few who've tried to go back to the roots or go back to our roots. Which particular one are we going back to? Are we going back to that of the Yorubas? Are we going back to that of the Igbos? Or everybody should just go back to that of their village? Because even within the decentralized Igbo society, you
There are
see
different.
variations of different ways of worship. Are we
Yes.
going to end up in a calamity of confusion?
No,
What should we do?
my uncle always say that the reason why we're not making progress that we speak to a God that doesn't know that we exist. This same uncle that was poking holes at Catholicism, and I agreed with him. He said, to a great extent, I agreed. He said, you go to church and you pray to Jesus, but Jesus doesn't know you. He knows the Jews because that's where he is from. Okay, he says you should pray to your grandfather, who is now an ancestor, and he's the one that knows you and would answer your prayers. He should be your intercessor, not Virgin Mary, because Virgin Mary doesn't know you. Now I don't believe in him saying Jesus doesn't know us. Okay, because I am a Catholic. If I say that, that would be
Heretical and
yes,
blasphemous.
yes, yes. But if you analyze what he's trying to what he's trying to say in the concept of religious beliefs, different diverse religious beliefs, you find that he's trying to make sense that why should I believe in Orisha when I have Amadioha, when I have Chuku, when I have Ali in Abakaliki, you know? Why should a Yoruba man believe in my God when he has his own God? Okay, and for the fact that he has his God and I have mine, does his God is his God superior than mine? Would his prayer be answered before mine? And so on and so forth. And for the fact that I'm a Christian and you're a Muslim, does it make me a better candidate to heaven or paradise than you? I think we are going to be judged based on our lived experiences and activities on earth and what we believe and where we are born. Because the fact that I'm a Catholic is because I was born here. What if I was born in Saudi Arabia? Would I have been a Catholic? So would I not go to hellfire because I was born in Saudi Arabia and I'm a Muslim? That is, if there is hellfire. Would I go to heaven because I was born in Saudi Arabia and I'm a Muslim? I think that the concept of hellfire and heaven would, as we see it as humans, uh, is laughable to the supreme being, because I believe there is one supreme being, and he sees us with different perspective based on our lived experiences, our backgrounds, and so on. So on the last day, there's anything like a last day, or any time we die, he takes us based on the experiences we've lived, the backgrounds where we've existed, and the teachings we've taken in, and so on. And I believe in the natural laws. There are natural laws, and they are everywhere in our religion. Do not sleep with another man's wife. Do not kill someone else. Do not lie against someone. You can love your neighbors, love yourself, and so on and so forth. So I think these are natural, universal laws for which all of us will be judged. Not only a Catholic and we didn't go for Holy Communion, and so on and so forth.
We've been talking about the issues in the country this period. We've been talking about the issues in Nigeria in times past. We've also looked at different connections. If you look at the time Buhari overthrew the government of Shagari, you had the idea of Andrew, do not leave the country. So that there was a popular advert as to Andrew, this frustrated young man who needs to leave the country to get greener pasture for himself. But then the government launched this campaign talking about Andrew, do not leave the country and stay back and support the country. For a young person listening to us in the current times we find ourselves and the way things are at the moment, one who wants to chart a course for himself, what direction should such a person be looking out for? Be the person a writer, a novelist, an engineer, a lawyer, and the likes of that.
What I know is that the Jackpot syndrome. didn't start today.
So,
Yeah. But some of us love this country. I have every opportunity to leave, but I don't want to. I think this is a beautiful place, one of the freest countries to live in. There are the security challenges, educational challenges, leadership challenges, and so on. Or I can come out in front of my house or in front of my friend's house and then drink my whiskey, and nobody comes to challenge me why you're drinking whiskey in the afternoon or why you're drinking in public. Yeah. And so on. I can stop by at my friend's house at any time and then demand for food, and he's not going to say, "Oh, you didn't call me before coming," you know.
I like that word there, demand.
Yes, yeah, yeah. And I do it. I just stop by, drive, I pass my friend's house, I just stop by and then go to their kitchen and then demand for food. I'll be telling the wife, where's my food? Give me food, you know. Hey,
And
wait, I
even
go,
when you leave, nobody feels like
nobody,
you
yeah,
invading our privacy, you're
yeah,
just being
yeah.
disrespectful. And
When are you coming again? You know. So this is a very beautiful place. The scenery, in fact, I was just discussing with my friend about visiting Yola this year. So to experience some that part of the north that I hadn't been to before. I haven't been to at all. So it's a very beautiful place, and I don't believe we should abandon it because of the insecurity, because of the leadership challenges, and so on.
yeah, it's something many persons look at and then they feel like it's not worth the time and all that. In conversations with DK Chukwumerije, which has spanned many years for me, you find these particular conversations about I love Nigeria, who I won't leave and for. And the more we think everybody should leave, the more we should understand the risks we're posing down there because the bad guys would stay here and their children, not even with their children already abroad, and then things will continue to go bad. If we're to take things we've set down here away, if we're to go with anything we've learned here, is the idea of becoming politically conscious. For that writer who wants to write, what should they be doing to ordinarily come to write very, very well? I know the first answer would be to read.
Mm.
What should they be reading? Because Mother Teresa said to pray, you need to pray. To learn how to pray is by praying. So to learn how to write is by reading, but
And
also and writing. What should they be reading? Who should they be reading?
everything,
And
everything. You read everything. You read sex, you read religion, you read psychology, you read the newspaper, you listen to the news, you you read all kinds of fiction. Don't restrict yourself because it gets in there, and then you don't know the effect of what you're reading, and the effect is going what you're reading is going to have on your writing until you sit down to write.
it will not show. You will not even feel that you've already been influenced by what you've read.
No, until you sit down to write, you would. In fact, until that work is out, and people begin to critics and reviewers begin to review and analyze the work, you wouldn't even know that what you're reading uh, influences what you write.
At the moment, publishing is taking a different turn in the country, unlike the times of Ohedo and the different persons that did self-publishing for themselves. Um, Buchi Emecheta, after having issues with UK publishers and all that, came back, did the stuff they did. You find Maria Maban, all these persons, they were self-publishing. But now times are changing. Publishing is taking a different turn. Do we have enough publishing houses in the country? And if no, what should be done?
It depends on the kind of publishing you mean. We have. Uh,
Self-publishing and traditional publishing also.
no, I don't think self-publishing is publishing. I think I just call
I
it
know,
publishing.
I know. I don't buy the
Yeah,
idea too.
yeah. I think traditional publishers, we have just very good ones now, a few of them. You have Narrative Landscape, you have Purple Chefs, you have Cassava Republic, you have Masobe Books. Farafina, I think Farafina is dead.
How,
And you have hundreds or if not thousands of writers out there just need to get noticed by these few traditional publishers. So I think we need to have more of them doing as amazingly well as Purple Shelves and Cassava Republic and Masobe. Okay, we need more, just like talking about magazines and journals. We need more publishing houses in Nigeria. And for young writers who cannot get traditional publisher, I think the key is not to just borrow money from your uncles and your parents and self-publish. It is to keep trying and keep submitting the manuscript because the whatever you self-publish will not be as valued as what is traditionally published.
Because in terms of submitting for prizes, you get to see the guidelines. They say self-published works are not accepted
Yeah,
most
exactly.
of the times, and because they
Yes.
probably have not
Like
gone
I
through
was
all the
saying,
steps of vetting.
yes. You see, my book Years of Shame that is going to be coming out possibly by this month, next month, uh, has passed through series of edits. But assuming it was to be self-published, I would have printed them long ago. Yeah, so I encourage every young person to keep trying. Don't just. There are books I have written books that took 10 years before they were published, but I could easily have submitted them to a printer or a publisher and say, okay, just publish for me and then pay them money. And then in 2 weeks they're out. But the quality of the work will not be as the same as that of traditionally published work.
Sure, because Ikenoke also pointed this particular stuff you talked about as to how long it took him to write a couple of stuff, and he's even saying that his first published work was not his first work he started, and the first work he started is still even yet to take that full form to be published. So he went on to publish other things after getting traction and contract with Abibi Man. And so it needs to be. They say writing is a lone business. You do it alone for a very long time, and then you come to be known in
Yeah.
the long run. And in the course of this, who should we be looking out for? Should we be? Many persons have critiqued the idea of those who sponsor um, most of our prizes, from Erufai and Burutai and all that. Who should we be looking out for? Who should we be going for sponsorship at the moment? And who should be for the lookout in terms of becoming the next publisher in the country? Anybody or everybody, regardless of moral background and that?
Things are hard, you know. Someone could start a publishing firm and an investor could bring in money and then get involved. So is the publisher going to investigate how this investor made his money before accepting that they invest? Publishing is business. They're not the same thing as prizes and awards. I
Yeah.
am the people who argue. In fact, one of the challenge problem I have with Lola Shoneyi is that I questioned going to Erufai to get funding to run the Kaduna Book and Art Festival. And I was involved with that issue at the time, and we had our online quarrel, and so on. I admire Laura a lot. I admire the things she do for African literature, for Nigerian literature, the festivals she organizes, the OIDA publishing house, the OIDA bookshop, and everything she does. I admire them immensely. But I critiqued the fact that she had to go to Erufai to get funding to start the Kaduna Book and Art Festival. And she didn't take it well, and we had our crisis and issues at the time, which I'm afraid still lingers till today. But for publishing, I think that if, for instance, Owida, which has been in existence for like a couple of years now, say a, a wealthy person says, I want to invest in Owida to take it to another level. It's business. The person brings their money and it helps the African literature to grow, and the business thrives, and the person takes their profit. There's no most all of the big businesses, including the Catholic Church, okay, has invested their money in even in contraceptives, whereas the church doctrine is against contraceptives. Okay, most big businesses have politicians, dictators, all kinds of people invest in them. So you cannot say you have a company and you invest people who invest in it. So we wouldn't want how do we want that company to grow if we invest those who invest in it? So they are not the same thing. So if we are talking about publishing and people investing, anybody can invest. But for prizes that recognizes honest work like writing, I think that we shouldn't go to people like Edify to get them to invest in it. For festivals that bring writers to discuss ideas, to discuss how we fight dictators, how we fight bad governance.
Oh, it's a great take down there, and with that, we are wrapping up our conversation down here. Today's conversation with Obinna Udenwe has given us, a clear look into his journey as a writer, and him given admission to study engineering, and him seeing an opportunity to talk about problems and revenge and anger, and you would think he has been to Sudan or he was in Sudan when he was writing what he has written down there, but it also goes to talk and show that anybody can be anywhere, just like a poet not having a hometown. So one can be a nomad, both in the ways of Romeo's nomad and then still in the ways of sitting down one place and then thinking. I think it's one of the poems by Chika Jones, when he was producing, when he was invited to produce for Wanawana Productions. He was talking about where books have taken him to. So while he was still in Nigeria, how he has traveled far to different places. We've also traveled far with this writer of ours down here. A man people should look out for. A man you should go look for his books. All your books are still in print at the moment. Still for
Yeah.
Satans and Shaitans still in print.
Well, no, the UK edition is available in a few or in many Nigerian bookshops, but the Nigerian edition is no longer available because the person who had the right or the company which had the rights to publish it um, folded up, and beside that, their rights expired after 5 years. So there is no Nigerian territory. There is no Nigerian public territorial rights currently in existence. So, but I think publishers have has indicated interest in acquiring the Nigerian rights for Satans and Shaitans, and maybe perhaps anytime this year we're going to discuss that and see what happens. Yeah, but
Oh,
every other book is available. Yeah,
that would be a great one there if the rights are able to be acquired. I know the politics that go on sometimes in reacquiring rights and all that. And recently, Nino Koraf was still struggling with one of the rights to her one of her first collections down
mediocre.
there. Nedi Okorafor, rather. Thank you for the correction. Today we've talked about, the inspiration behind his novels and their reflections of what we find in our societies down here. You should check them out in all available bookstores and where you get your books. The easiest place you can get them is on Amazon, on in whichever country you get to find yourself, whether you're in North Korea. I don't know if they will allow. Of course, they don't have problems with books, at least the much I know at the moment. From the widow who died with flowers in her mouth down to every other work down there, we've looked at the interplay between politics and the ways in which we go about our relationships. We've talked about politics from a different perspective also. We as Nigerians, not waiting for God as we have been told for a very long time to do, to come solve our problems. It is you and I, as well as our leaders, who do this. And if we are to go back to the Bible still, we have this idea of the priest is brought out from the people, save for the few persons who've suspected their origin, the likes of Abacha and a couple of other persons down there. Even our current president is still shrouded in secrecy and all that. But that is still a conversation for another day. We've looked at grief, we've looked at silence, we've looked at love, we've looked at power, and this all run through his work. We've also touched on his upcoming novel. You should be looking out for it. It's going to be as interesting as others have been in the past, years of shame, and how he uses storytelling to reflect personal and national experiences is
Yeah,
something we must be looking out for. Is someone we should be reading. And if you're a book club owner, if you run a book club, you should be able to check out and then feature these books in your book clubs. If you have a personal library and you want your children to get to look into the problems and the situations of the country, you need to be reading his works. It's been a thoughtful and revealing session, my big brother. Thank you
Thank you.
for coming on the podcast.
Thank you again for having me. I've really, really enjoyed myself. Uh, you know, it was supposed to be for an hour, and I think we've had over an hour having this conversation around my person, my work, and everything. And I am indeed very grateful to you for the opportunity to express myself, to talk about my creative process and my characters and my work, and most importantly, my culture and national issues in Nigeria. Thank you so much for having me again.
Thank you. If you've listened to this point, please do share with your family, share with your mother, share with your friends, and let's continue these conversations. And I hope you've not had a boring conversation, because we down here, we've not had that conversation. And I do tell people almost all the time, they keep on asking me for the name. What about the name? I'm like, people just feel politics, literature, and all these are boring. And it starts with my sister. She said all through my teenage years up until when I became an adult, I've been talking about boring stuff. And when you ask her what are the boring stuff I talk about, she's like, you talk about church, philosophy, literature. These are not things young people should be thinking about. They should be thinking about how to make money and stuff like that. And when the idea of titling the podcast came up, I'm like, okay, it is not just my sister who thinks I talk boring stuff. Other persons also think certain things are boring. So I'm like, why not call it boring conversations? And here we are, but it's anything but boring.